landscape management and forest management. About Professor Oliver, first time I came to know from Jitendra Agrawal, who had done a training with Dr. Oliver, and he talked very high about him, and that is how this meeting has come, because then he asked me that since he is going to USA, I should organize this meeting here. Professor Oliver is working on landscape approaches to management and global resources issues. He has authored many books and he has written almost 150 scientific and technical papers. Along with his wife Fatima, he is writing a book on global resources and the environment. He is also involved with the Red Plus team here. Along with him, we have Devin Ruth. He is sitting on the back side. He is basically from North Carolina, and presently he is working on operational and strategic land management, which includes major part of forest. Dr. Alark Saxena is the third member of the team. He is a program director of Yale Himalayan Initiative. He is basically a socio-ecologist and working in forestry side. So I welcome all the guests here, and to begin with, I will request R.K. Gupta, additional pieces of coordination, to make a brief presentation about forest department, and then Professor Oliver will take over. Thank you.
Morning everybody. It's a small presentation which will give a glimpse of the forest of Madhya Pradesh, and salient features are covered in this. So to begin with, this state has maximum forest area. Many India's major rivers originate from the forest of Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh homes abundant biodiversity. We have teak and sal forest. Teak means Tectona grandis, and sal Shorea robusta. Most important, I would like to emphasize this point, last one. Our all forests are managed scientifically with a working plan, and you know this working plan is a document which is prepared by a very senior officer and takes around 2 years. And this working plan exercise is done very seriously by the forest department and the officers, and it prescribes each and every treatment for every area covered under that division. So this is the working plan, which we call it the Bible of the forest here. As far as the issues are concerned with the forest, you can see there are economic and social lives which are intertwined with the forest for the population who are residing near the forest people. Second one is the forest policy. Emphasis is given when we prepare the working plan. There are salient features of the forest policies which covers increase the production, increase the forest cover, forest conservation activities, conserve the biodiversity, livelihood opportunities. These all are the aspects which are covered in the forest policy. So these are taken care of while preparing the working plan, and whatever prescriptions are given, they aims at covering those objectives of the forest policy. This last point is 21 wings are there for just to know the structure of the forest department. We HOF is here, and we have 21 wings which looks after the different tasks like administration and protection, joint forest management, coordination, and all other wings. This is a glimpse of a plantation which is thinned. It's a teak forest. It has come up very well. This photograph has just put for this plant preparation, greenhouse, nurseries and all. This is one of the plantation of bamboos, and these are the Joint Forest Management Committee members along with the staff. This I had put for showing this livelihood activities, and Tendupatta pluckers are there, and we, I think 250 crores around we pay as wages. This is another activity wherever the water bodies are available, So this fish rearing activity is also taken. Now these are certain figures. If you compare the forest of India and Madhya Pradesh, so India is having 23.81% of the total forest area, geographical area, forest area with respect to geographical area, whereas Madhya Pradesh is having 30.72%. If we talk of the legal position of the forest area of the state, then you can see as the reserve forest we are having 65%, protected forest 32%, and other forest is 1.8%. Total it makes 94689 square kilometer. Density wise if we talk, then we are having very dense forest 7%, dense forest 36%, sparse forest 39%. Very dense means 0.7 and above density. Dense forest 0.4, 0.5 to 0.7 you can say, sparse 0.5, 0.4, and total forest area is this much 77700. So far as the forested area is concerned, open forest we are having 18%. Types of forest species wise if we talk, then the mixed forest is the maximum one. You can see 58.49%. We have teak forest 19% around, sal forest 4.15%, and we have open area also 18%. So far as the responsibilities of the department is concerned, you can see this is the major activities: protection of the forest, wildlife and biological diversity. Another one is the increasing the productivity through improvement of forest and regeneration. We take the plantation activity also. As per the prescription of the working plan, we exploit the timber and bamboo, so we sell it and that is marketed. We give the forest produce at concessional rates to the villagers who are residing within 5 km periphery. Ecotourism activities are also taken. Last point is again important. This is the people's participation. This is our key mantra nowadays, because only regulatory things are not working. So we have to take the help of these joint forestry members, committee members, to protect the forest. And these are the other bodies, corporations, institutions. As you can see, this one is MP State Forest Development Corporation. This is for commercial plantations of teak and bamboo mainly. Second one is MP State Minor Forest Produce. As you have seen that Tendupatta or Diospyros melanxyla and other MFP collection and their trade, this is looked after by this MFP Federation. Third one is State Forest Research Institute. Some research works, they are funded by the department with the plan budget, and they do some related research activities. MP Ecotourism Board is there, and this was the first state who set up this ecotourism board in the country. So some destination places they choose and they select and they develop for the ecotourism purposes. Bamboo mission, this has come up for increasing the productivity of the bamboo, you can say, plus bamboo to increase improve the bamboo plantation for the villagers. Then bamboo crafts, just to improve that field, this bamboo mission has been set up. This is one of the activities in ecotourism Rappling. This is a joint forestry management committee scenario. You can see that total 15,228 these forest committees are there. Out of this, village forest committee is 9650, FPCs are 4747, eco development committee is 831. So they cover an area of 66,874. You can see that the total area of 94,000. So still some area is left. This is because of inaccessibility of the area mainly. This is again to show that we give this 10% of the total profit to JFMCs, and this is out of this timber production and bamboo production, and this net profit is calculated after deducting the departmental expenses and all. In case of bamboo, it is 100% which goes to the persons who are indulged in the bamboo felling work. So far as wildlife management is concerned, we are having 10 national parks, 25 sanctuaries, 6 project tiger areas, and buffer areas are also notified. We do manage these wildlife areas with this integrated tiger conservation plan for all tiger reserves. This Chambal, Cane and Son Ghadial sanctuary is also there to protect the aquatic animals. We do have fossil parks in Dindori, and another one is Dhar. These are some of the efforts As you can see, the vultures are endangered here. So special efforts are being made for their conservation, and recently counting was done. It came around say 7,000. Census 2014 says the number of tigers is 308 approximately. Then regional wildlife rescue squads are also established for rescue operations of the wild animals. For smuggling of wildlife and their trade, illegal trade, we have dog squads also, and they help in this crime detection, especially in case of wildlife crime. In case of cattle deaths or human deaths or injuries, adequate compensation provisions are there. Recently they have been increased by the government so as to gain the confidence of the local people who are suffered. This is one of the efforts. This pangolin smuggling business is a new trade here we have seen since last 2 years. So a network of pangolin smugglers were busted, around 75 culprits from 8 states, and this business is connected to the China also. They use this for the medicinal purpose and all. Village relocation is another important issue for the wildlife people, because if you want to have this inviolate areas for wildlife, that resettlement is a must, and wildlife people have done a very good job, and they have relocated many villages from the tiger reserves or wildlife areas, PAs. These are again certain successful efforts, successful reintroduction of tigers in Panna story. I think no need to tell, you all must be knowing about that. And Barasinga is another species which have been translocated and reintroduced in Satpura Tiger Reserve from Kana. These are certain photographs, just increase in the population of the tiger. This is the Barasinga translocation, this is pangolin, this is a rescue operation. These are certain production figure for your interest. Timber 14-15, you can say 2.4 lakhs, or in million cubic you can have this figure. And fuel stakes we are at 1.78 lakhs. Bamboo 14-15, it is total 4,200 notional ton. Notional ton, as you might be knowing, that 2400 meter is equal to 1 notional ton. This is one of the depots. Revenue figures, you can see this is 14, this is gradually increasing, it's around 1,000 crore. So these are the certain figures for your interest. IT, you know, the department is using IT for the monitoring and management purposes, and you can see all these management systems, fire messaging systems to control the fires, offense management system, financial management system, wildlife management system, employee database management system, plantation monitoring systems. This last one is again very important, EduSet network, because if you want to provide training on any issue to any people in the Madhya Pradesh, so we right from this command room only, we can just take up any issue and we can just train them and convey our messages. These are certain awards which have been conferred to the department, and this last one, NTC award for excellence in the wildlife management, recently it been given to the Kana National Park and Panna National Park. Kana and Page, I suppose, Page National Park. So this is all about the forest department in short, so that you can have a glimpse of the forest department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gupta ji, for a very brief presentation. I would like to add just 2 points more. Number one, in Madhya Pradesh, this state, a large population is dependent upon forest. So all the time we can't look after only the interests of forest, but the people are also very important here. The second thing is that all the rivers which originate in Madhya Pradesh are not fed by the snow. No glacial here. So all the rivers, they originate from some points in forest, and in order to regulate a continuous flow of water, forest is essential. So these 2 things are very important. Recently there was a big congregation of people thinking on how to live better, and in this congregation of people it included the Prime Minister of India also. And one of the recommendations that they have made is to take a massive plantation program on both the sides of river in Madhya Pradesh. They have made a 51 points charter which has been sent to United Nations also, and probably all the heads of all the countries in the world. So it has been done very recently. Thank you. Now I invite Professor Oliver.
More. Thank you very much for that overview. That was very helpful. It gave me the breadth of what you're doing. I've heard very much of your work, both from Alok, Saxena, and from the other people from the Indian Forest Service that Yale has been working with. I am very pleased to finally relocate my former master student, Srisan Raghavan, who was with me earlier, and he actually was working on some of the material that I will present to you. I do want to also notice that in what you showed me, that you're actually increasing every year the goods and services that you're producing from the forests, which, congratulations. It is something that we're noticing, that the forest is capable of producing very many things if we can organize it right. Okay, I would like to speak briefly and show you that the world, well, you know this, the world is concerned about everything from biodiversity to livelihoods to wood to fire safety and many other things. And we have been looking at different ways that we can ensure that we are achieving those goals, that we are monitoring, and that we can show transparently to other people that we're on a sustainable course. The world has recently been talking very much about sustainability, but the Indian Forest Service got started by the same man, Dr. Brandeis, that the U.S. Forest Service did, and that my institution got started by Gifford Pinchot, a student of Brandeis's. The thing I want to emphasize is that forestry, and under Dr. Brandeis and others, has been thinking about sustainability for a very long time. And I was asked about 25 years ago, how can we convert the idea of sustainability from timber production to sustainability of biodiversity, livelihoods, and many other values of the forest. And I would like to show you both conceptually and specifically some work that we're doing. It started off as computer tools, and as we move forward with the computer tools, we developed a system. In fact, Srisan was part of the development of it. The problem is that although we showed that all of these different tools will work, a computer program is not like a book. A book, you can write it and put it on the shelf and take it down 10 years later and read it. If you take a computer program and put it on the shelf and take it down in 10 years, you can't run it anymore because everything has changed. So we have the concepts, but with the modern ideas, the modern computer capacity of both the people working with me and the people we met yesterday from Iowa and from other people, we are looking at an opportunity to develop a system that can be put on the web and will be completely transparent. I will give you the background of that, and then I will ask Alok and Devin to give you some of the details of it. By the way, can you hear me if I speak like this? Well, Alok, you'll need to redo this. I'm using Alok's computer because a program I'm going to show you, as I said, was developed 20 years ago, and it crashes on most computers, so Alok is the one that has one of them that actually works. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is we now, as you know, have the capability to, with GIS, identify where, for example, fire hazards are at present. This allows us to station our fire equipment at the right place, to monitor the right places. For example, if the red was high fire danger and the black was very high fire danger and the pink was normal, this would be acceptable. Now, what would be, of course, much better is if we could predict into the future where we would have a higher fire danger. Now, what that would allow us to do is, first of all, be able to get the right equipment, but even better, we could do what we say is win the war before the battle is fought. And that is, if we know that these areas are going to be of a higher fire danger, let's treat them before that so that we simply avoid that fire danger. And if we can anticipate, we can treat and plan something different. And now, if we could do this with fire, we could also be able to predict that in terms of other values. Where is our biodiversity going to become a problem? Where and when and how can we avoid that? When and where is the amount of different NTFPs for livelihoods going to be a problem? How can we make that smooth? Basically, the whole idea is how can we manage the landscape so that we provide a sustainable set of values across it. Now, I will back up and point out just this one thing that's very important. Long ago, our scientific and ecological idea was that the natural forest was in this complex condition. Work beginning in the 1960s and 70s made us realize that disturbances were in fact natural. And because they were natural, all of these different structures are natural within the forest. This is different than what we thought before. As long as we thought that this was the only natural condition, we did only selective cutting, and we also protected fires so that we didn't get any disturbances to the forest, and we also many people said we shouldn't cut the forest because that's disturbing the natural condition. What we now realize is that not only does the natural forest exist in all of these conditions, but that there are certain values that are only provided by some of them but not others. For example, if we look at where species are dependent, some species are dependent on each of these different structures, we call it. In the United States, because we have let our forests get too crowded, we have all of these species that are endangered that live in the savanna structure. We're now creating more savanna structure. By the way, the Amur tiger depends on the savanna and open structure. I'm working in northeast China where they have a tiger reserve, but it's so dense they don't get any grasses beneath, they have no deer, and there are very few tigers in there. So it's not very healthy for it. Other species depend on the complex structure. So what we realize, to go back up here, is that if we're going to maintain all biodiversity, we need all structures on the landscape. Also, if you're worried about fire, which we are in the United States, we need these open and savanna structures because those are the ones that slow the fire down. If you have a continuous forest, the fire can move through the canopy here. But if you have these conditions, the fire, as we say, lies down and goes very slowly through them, and we can manage it better. Also, the water is most available or the greatest amount of water going into the water table is in these two structures right here, although we need these structures to maintain the root system. So the whole idea is how do we manage to maintain all the different structures across the landscape. And the way we're planning, the way we do it, and we've done this before, is that like all places they have a forest inventory. And historically that has been for tree values, and we end up with a tree list, which is typical for a given area. This is what the tree list looks like. What we know is that we can relate that tree list not only to timber volume, but we can relate that tree list to such things as what structure it's in. Simply by looking at how many trees of what size, we can decide is it in a complex forest or a savanna forest or a dense forest. We can also relate, looking at the tree list, what the fire danger is, what the danger is for other insects. We can relate to it the amount of carbon stored in the forest, so that we're able to look at a forest and look at an area and determine what values are there based on the inventory, which is the things that you have been taking. Now, excuse me a minute while I go down just a little bit. If we look at a forest as we have it now, a forest consists of very many different stands. Let me go back to the stands a minute. This is a map of a forest. Most forests in the world have this, where each compartment or each area has an inventory. And we can then relate for that inventory what is the current condition of the forest. Now, we can, right now, for example, this particular area of just 5 different stands has a very balanced distribution of different structures. The question is, how will that change in the future? And how can we anticipate that it will change and manage it? If we don't manage it, we may have a good condition at present, but for example, we may have plenty of open structure, but it may go down to none at all. Or we may have a low fire danger and suddenly it goes up. What we want to do is maintain a more even range of conditions. Now, think of it is we can project what will happen at one time step in the future, but what would happen if we could predict for a very long time in the future? And we could predict not only how each stand would change, but we could predict that we could then say what are going to be the values that are provided. For example, this is an area where we projected it and said we're not doing any activities. So how is this? We can also project from this what are the values that are going to be provided. Now, I'd like to show you that our ability to project in the future is based on growth models. And we have, in the United States since the 60s, there have been about 8 or 9 growth models developed. Unfortunately, most of the people who developed those have either retired or passed away. And there is not a continuity of people maintaining those models well. Now, we took, and I'll show you where, we took what we think is the most robust of those growth models, and we put that into our original system that we developed in the 90s, and we want to revise today. This is called the landscape management system. And what we have is the ability to put in here the information on an individual landscape. This one that I'm showing you right now is from North Carolina, and each of these is a stand. It's about 2,500 hectares. Now, I'm going to show you another one that I will use that's only about 400 hectares. That's this one, which is from the state of Washington. Now, once we have these, we can put in here, let me do one thing very quickly. We can put in here there's a series of growth models that we have. We decide that instead of putting all the growth models in, we think the most valuable one to use is this one right here, because it can project simultaneously a mixed stand of about 70 to 90 species. And we can calibrate that for different areas in the world, different species in the world. So if we put the original tree list data in, we can look at that by clicking with a mouse and looking what the inventory is, and this shows us immediately what the inventory of that stand is. Now the next thing we can do is take that same take that same stand and project the inventory a different way. This simply took the tree list and put the trees individually randomly across the area based on their species, diameter, etc. Now we can also project this forward in time, and what the idea here is to go to a tree list, project it forward, and look at what it looks like 5 years later, project it again, so that over time we can get the future tree list, which is a projection of growth. And we will project this for 100 years. Okay, we've just projected that for 100 years. We can look at it at any time in the future. Visually, for example, we could look at the inventory as well. This is what it looks like in 2035. By 2080, it would look like this. Now, we can also, from this, do such things as, what if we did a silvicultural treatment in a year, say the year 2040, and we could do any silvicultural treatment, but I am doing one that we pre-planned just to make it quickly. And then let's grow. We can then show you what the stand looks like after it's been treated. I tell everyone my students are much better students than they are loggers. So now we can grow this again into the future up until the year 2100. And we can see what it looks like at different times in the future. You see, we have changed the structure, we've changed the habitat, we've changed the water quality, we've changed the NTFPs that are available. We have also gotten timber off of there. What we can also ask ourselves is, what other values do we get? For example, it can tell us what structure we have any year. We could also ask such things as, what is the carbon sequestered here? And what this does is immediately show us what this immediately shows us. Let me do one more thing here. Is we can see for this stand how much carbon is in the forest, how much is in the, of that we can divide it into the amount in the stem, roots, crown, litter, and this is where we cut products. It tells us how much is in the products, that we basically, when you build out of wood, you have wood in the product. What's very important here is if we look at the substitution, when you build out of wood, you save all the fossil fuel and all the carbon that you would have used to make concrete or steel. So that wood is a very environmentally valuable commodity. Now what this allows us to do is to go back to this and say that if we did nothing, at this point and just let the forest grow, we could look in this model and say, what does that produce in terms of future values? The red is the standing timber, the blue is the harvested timber, and there's no harvest. So there's no local communities. The income, there's no income, it's just administrative costs. Notice our fire safety. If it was getting safer, it's going up. The fire is getting more dangerous. The fires that are occurring in the United States forests are because people thought if they just stopped all fires and locked the forest up, it would be best for the forest, and it's not working. Notice these are the different habitats, and notice that the different habitats, the savanna structure disappears if you don't have disturbances, the open disappears, you're losing your biodiversity. And we can also project where the fire danger is going to be with this. And notice the carbon sequestration is increasing. Now, if we can find a way to manage the different stands at different times, then hopefully we can create a more even flow, not what I just showed you there. To give you an example, if we cut this stand at this time, thin that stand at that time, did a savanna cutting at that time, we might get a better flow across the landscape. Not a perfect one, but can keep working till we get it perfect. At the same time, we can see what we're getting in terms of income stream. We're seeing that our fire danger is being reduced, and we're getting a higher biodiversity, and we can map not only the carbon in the forest, but the carbon in the products and the carbon in the substitution itself. So the whole idea is we can project over time what will happen under different scenarios. The next problem or the next challenge is, of these, how do we choose the optimum mix of what we do to each stand so that over the long run we'll have an even flow? And that's where we take this system and either put it into an optimization program, which some of us are working on, or put it into another program that I'll show you right now called a toggle system. And that system is one where we begin with, let me go to one more PowerPoint here. Yep, that's right. Okay, we begin by taking if we took each stand, and on a landscape you may have 200 stands, and each stand can be projected by such things as clear cut today, clear cut in 10 years, clear cut in 20, 30, 40, thin today, thin in 10, 20, 30, 40, shelter wood in 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. And did that for each stand and tried to put all the combinations together, we would have somewhere above 20 million combinations. So a computer is what we call a high-speed idiot. It will do exactly what you tell it to do without making mistakes very fast, but it'll do what you tell it to do, not what you want it to do. So we have to program the computer right and get the right system. So what we do is we put the system, we choose selective stands, one for each. We group our forests into different types of stands, maybe young stands or ones of a certain species or something like that. And we choose a representative example of that group, and we project all the different alternative ways that can be managed. And then we projected on the landscape such that if we take one of the groups and right now all of the landscape is, okay. Okay, good to see you. I understand. If we look at the landscape, notice that I showed you if we did nothing, this would be our flow of carbon, our flow of habitats, our flow of forest health. If we decide, that's because all of the different groups are in a position where we do no no treatments at all. If we take one of the groups and say that instead of putting all of it through the no action or do nothing pathway, if we put some of it through this pathway, then notice we immediately start getting some timber here, some income, we get more habitat, we get more carbon, our fire safety goes up. If we put some other of it through this pathway and this pathway, and then this pathway, and then this pathway, we can begin to develop a more sustainable scenario. We could keep moving this, and what we then do is decide of this group of stands, what particular stands to meet this percentage or this many hectares goes through this pathway and through that pathway. The result is we can show that we can manage sustainably. We can then tell the local forester that of this group of stands, you need to choose certain ones that are, for example, harvested in the year of this pathway and treat them, and choose other stands and treat it another way. And you will know as a result of that that you will be sustainable in the long run. Once we know that we're going to be sustainable, and we can show, for example, over time how all the different values are sustainable like this, we can then show in a map how we expect each stand to be in the future, and this takes any question away. We can guarantee that that such things as for livelihoods, we have enough of everything in the future, where it will be. We're working, as Devin will show you, with Google Earth to put this up on where it can go up on Google Earth and anyone could look at it. What that does is it makes it completely transparent, sustainable, and it also makes it much more easy to plan. If you know you're going to harvest in this area this year, you know what equipment you need, what species you're going to be harvesting, so you can look for markets and it becomes much more available. Anyone can check on this by doing such things as going to Google Earth and finding where, for example, you may find infrared hotspots. For example, if these were infrared hotspots, this one's no problem, that's what we expect. But if we find an infrared hotspot here, it tells us somebody is logging in the wrong place. So we have the ability, once we get the ability to manage transparently across the landscape, then we have the ability to manage our wood sustainably so that we can substitute wood for steel or concrete. And new innovative buildings are coming along in that. If you look at it, it takes 70 megajoules of fossil fuel to produce a wood floor, 516 megajoules to produce a steel floor, and 800 megajoules to produce a concrete floor. So it's very environmentally sound. And the other thing is, the world is very concerned about a lack of forest villages. If you look at it, forests occupy about 33% of the land area. We're only harvesting in the world about 20% of what's being grown in forests, and half of that goes to subsistence fuel wood, which doesn't save much fossil fuel. If we can put that into wood products, then we'll save fossil fuel, but that 33% of the world's area only employs 0.4% of the world's labor force. Now, and what we find is that the people are leaving subsistence farming, the farms are growing up to forests, and the people are crowding in cities. This is an example of the United States. The rural areas going down, the urban areas are going up. This is Turkey. The rural areas are going down, the urban areas are going up. That's the city of Istanbul by itself. Now, if we could take small equipment, small high-tech equipment, and use it to cut the excess wood in the forest by the laborers, and by doing that we can maintain the different structures, and we can do it with small high-tech equipment so that we don't put our money into the equipment but put it into labor, we can employ a lot more people in the forest. And instead of having the forest just a place where we extract logs, if we cut the wood there, we get more value added, more turnover, more people staying in the forest. I did a calculation, and roughly if we did conventional logging of all the forest that's growing in the world, we could employ 1.4% of the labor force, but if we went to small high-tech equipment, we could employ 6% of the labor force. So we're looking at a technical tool that will allow us to plan so that we will ensure that we can get steady flows of all these values. Now, I've given you a technical overview and a concept, and Alark, let me turn it over to you. Are there any questions first on this part of it?
Oliver, you have been making a very top quality model in terms of projections on this stand. Have you made any model regarding water management below this stand?
What's
Water management. Management of water below the stand.
water, the management of water below the stand? We could do it with correlations with this. The relationship of forest to water is fascinating in that in the type of area we have in India, when you have leaves on the trees, it sucks the water out. When the leaves are off the trees, the water goes into the soil. The forest is very important for keeping a soil structure for the water to seep in. But what we find is that if we have times when we cut part of the forest, that's where the leaves don't suck the water out. So if we always keep a forest moving with some openings for the water to go in, that's the best, but we have to then let it regrow so we keep the structure such that the water will penetrate in the soil.
If I may add, I think the idea is that the forest species or the inventory list can really allow us quickly to look at water functions as well. So once we've created an inventory list, we have a detailed understanding of what the species are. Then the water management is a value that can be derived out of some of those species structures.
As I just mentioned, there was communication where the maximum emphasis has been given on this water aspect of forest.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
So we have been all the time thinking about timber and other services. Now we have to go and think more about these water services for the waters.
Actually, what we're finding is every time you start thinking of one more thing, people will find another.
Yeah.
So what we find is by managing in a way to have all the structures, we think we can provide all the values no matter what people come up with. For timber to move from one structure to another, we have to cut it. Employment is in the timber, and in providing in the structures, the NTFPs. The fire protection is in having the mixture of structures. The biodiversity is there. The carbon is in both the forest and the wood products. So we think that that way we can correlate everything to the structures and manage them over time.
This fire model is basically based on temperate forest, which is in USA. In this state, we have got only tropical forest, where ground fire is not there. It's only ground fire.
Yep, no, you're right there. Although I've I've seen a couple of cases of tropical crown fires, but that was after a
I
windstorm.
don't think in the last 50 years I've seen any ground for a fire in Madhya Pradesh.
Uh-huh.
That's also, sir, because partly due to the structure that we have one way or the other found in our forest. If the forest becomes very dense or extremely dense, which has happened in United States without proper silviculture operations, then the fire can very quickly jump up to the ground.
That's a windstorm situation here.
Right.
Mhm.
And one of the things I think you raised very important is that through this discussion is there would always be a new demand or a new value that will come from forest.
I would say that's a good situation.
No,
You
that's-
know more and more, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Considering it's a 1/3 of the land area, the more that we can provide for society, I agree with. It is a good thing.
In fact, more the answer for the current demand if we give.
Mhm.
People get involved. Straight.
Right.
And so I agree with you, and the more organized so that we can project and predict what's going to be there and how we can provide it, the better we will be.
So this wisdom, in the last 35 years which we have got, wood use is better, which was not there at all. Earlier we used to substitute, we used to demand saying that we shouldn't use wood and we should use all
Yes,
those,
yes.
very
Now it is
intensive-
different now.
So
Yes.
that's a good wisdom which has, come over now.
Yes,
We must lock the carbon inside, that's what it is.
yes.
Sir, would you quickly talk about the wood building use that you're thinking about?
Yes, let me see if I've got it here. Okay, you saw me show you the value of wood for building, and it's extremely valuable. The value of wood for fuel doesn't save nearly as much fossil fuel, so we just want to use our scraps and leftovers for that. This is a study I've done. I'll be glad to share it with you. It was a publication. This is the fossil fuel savings by substituting a wooden beam for a steel beam in the floor. If we burn that wood, this is how much fossil fuel we would save. This is the CO2 values the same way. Now, there's a new innovation in the way wood is being used, and it doesn't need to be high quality wood, that they cut it into pieces about, can you hear me okay, about this big and as long as possible, and finger joint the ends, then put them like this and build these pieces that are about 20 meters long and 3 meters wide, and then they stack them vertically and horizontally and make mid-rise apartments. These, basically the wood substitutes for reinforced concrete, and it can be used for floors, walls. This is a 10-story building in Melbourne, Australia, made that way. And this is a 9-story building in London. This is a 20-story building that's going to be built in Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, if we think about it, the future population is going to need housing, and rather than put them in the major cities, tier 1, if we can put them in the smaller cities where there'll be a demand for mid-rise buildings, 5 to 10 stories high, if we build out of this, I calculated we can reduce our fossil fuel demand by somewhere around 15 to 20%, and our CO2 emissions by somewhere around 25%, just by building out of these. This is, for example, a picture of I took this, I was down in Melbourne, the Melbourne Library, and it's only 40% the weight of a steel building. This is made out of that cross-laminated timber. Very beautiful inside, very comfortable. It goes up very quickly, and in the United States and in Europe, it costs the same as putting up a steel or concrete building. As the price of fossil fuel goes up, and as the technology and expertise on this improves, we think it'll be much cheaper than the other buildings. Now, imagine these pieces being built, let me find, by wood cut in small communities. Now, I want to show you something here. Our typical way of harvesting has been using big machinery and big trucks to haul things away from the villages. Now, if you look here, this is the cumulative employment in logging. This is the cumulative employment in cutting it into wood, and this is the employment in putting it in wood furniture. What if we could move this to the villages? Now, the other thing is, often when they do this, they leave a lot of wood behind. But they're getting to be very innovative cutting mechanisms. There's a better one than that. This one is the best one. An Australian machine called a Lucas mill that you carry into the woods, you put over the logs, and you cut them. Basically, this machine costs $15,000, as opposed to the other machines costing $200,000 or more. The other thing is, once we cut it into smaller pieces, we don't need as big a roads or trucks to get it out of the woods. We could basically take all of this employment and put it in the villages so that they ship out the raw cants such as this that we put into cross-laminated timber, or they can cut this into tabletops and start furniture manufacturing right in their own area. This is a place where in Liberia all of this wood was left over after logging. They took small equipment and made all of this and all of this, where they had local furniture shops that were quite good. So we think, there's other innovative things where we may not even need roads if we're stacking our logging equipment on things like this monorail here. So we think that there's opportunities for using small equipment and more labor and getting more work in the woods. Okay.
What is the life of these wood-based houses?
You mean these high rises?
This is the cement concrete structure.
About the same. These will last 100 years or more. Concrete will last 100 years or more. Some of these, I'm sure, the wood houses will still be up in 200 years. Occasionally you can find a concrete structure up in 200 years. You see, the thing about concrete is if you get a earthquake, you get a separation of the steel from the concrete and the house gets to be weak. That doesn't happen with the wood. The big thick wood is resistant to fire. It's the houses made out of thinner pieces of wood that are the most resistant one, most susceptible to fires. This actually has better burning strength than a steel beam does. The third thing is also in a fire you get differential heating in the steel and concrete, and there you get more breakage quickly. So it lasts. Of course, we haven't had one of these houses last forever because it's a new technique, but we know regular houses can last 250 years. So we're quite confident this is the same lifespan or more than steel and concrete.
We'll move on to what Devin.
Yeah, let's move on to you, Devin.
Hi. If you give me just a moment, let me switch over to all of my... Alrighty. So once again, my name is Devin Ruth. I've been working with Chad Oliver for the last few years, working with ALARC as well. And specifically, first of all, can everybody hear me? How about now? Okay. I've been working with Chad Oliver for the past couple of years, specifically on a land area out in Wyoming. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about the platform that we use to do research out in Wyoming, what the platform offers technologically, and that underlies what Chad discussed with his platform for LMS. What we'd like to do is come up with a structure that is transparent, easy to access, and verifiable anywhere in the world. That platform that I've mentioned is Google Earth Engine. So everyone is familiar with Google Earth, of course. but Google Earth Engine is a project that Google developers started a few years after Google Earth was released. And essentially what the developers wanted to do was allow the research and environmental community to access the same sort of computing power and analytical tools that they used to build Google Earth. Now, I'll go ahead and situate ourselves in the landscape that I described in Wyoming, talk through the scripts a little bit, talk through the analytical processes, and then at the end show you a couple of products that came out of Google Earth Engine. And, well, diving right in. All right. So, as far as the landscape is concerned, I've been working in a ranch called Ucross. It's about 90 square kilometers, and it's located in the northeastern corner of Wyoming. About 6 permanent ranch hands work it. And so, as you might imagine, being 90 square kilometers, they have some trouble trying to identify what's going on across their landscape at any given time. Previously, what they've done is sampling strategies where they go out to particular points in the pastures, take sample points as representatives, and then try to extrapolate from there. But with the increase in remote sensing data and the increase in computing power, there are a lot better options now for them to manage their land. The first script that I'm going to show you is a pretty technical script. It's called a minimum noise fraction transformation. Now that's just a fancy way of saying we take in available satellite data, we clean it according to what sort of noise is available, and we output a cleaner satellite data set that we can use for further analysis. Now that lets me segue a little bit into what Google Earth Engine offers as a platform. Again, everyone's familiar with Google Earth. The interface that I was just showing you is very similar to Google Earth Pro that you can download on your computer. But Google Earth Engine, if you've noticed, I accessed via Chrome. I logged into my Gmail, I had scripts that were already sent to me, and I clicked on them, and I can do this anywhere in the world with a web browser. Now, what I load whenever I click on one of these scripts is this GUI interface here. It has the embedded Google Earth Engine, but it also has a few tools up at the top, the layers, data sets. As well, if I pull down this tab here, there's an entire automatic programming or API, a programming interface, that I can use to build any tool I can think of with satellite imagery. Now, the satellite imagery that Google Earth Engine has is already quite impressive. What they've tried to do is go to every repository of free satellite imagery in the world and ingest whatever they were allowed to ingest. This includes almost all of Landsat, not all of it, but whatever is missing, we can put in requests to get it. Includes MODIS, includes Sentinel data, climate and weather data, water data, all sorts. Additionally, if there is data that does not exist in Google Earth Engine, all you have to do is upload it to Google's cloud. Doing so allows you to use the automatic programming interfaces, any of the tools that you've already written, and apply those analytic processes to your own data. From what I understand, Indian Space Research Organization has put in a lot of work and a lot of initiatives increasing the amount of remote sensing data that they're going to collect. And that's the story with just about every space agency around the world. Remote sensing data is coming in at a very, very rapid pace. And we're getting so much of it that we're actually having trouble figuring out what's available, and we're also having trouble figuring out how to deal with all of it. So one of the powers of Google Earth Engine is it not only allows you to access all of this free remote sensing data, but it allows you to access it in a way that is much faster to process and, of course, free to process than previously. How many people are familiar with Envy at all? Envy is an application that's been used for the past few years on individual laptops to analyze satellite data. It's a proprietary piece of software, and a single license is several $1,000s. Now, previously, Envy was one of the few ways you could actually do this type of analytical process right here called the minimum noise fraction transformation. But after getting access to Google Earth Engine, which now is sort of in a beta mode, and all you have to do is ask Google if you're allowed to use it. If you work for a government, if you work for an environmental agency, you have a golden ticket and you're in. But doing so gave us an opportunity to write up that minimum noise fraction transformation, bypass the need for proprietary software, And now we have it to use on any software that Google offers us and any software we can upload. So just to give you another example too of the power that this API allows. Previously, a person would need to sit down with the satellite imagery, go through tile upon tile, finding the images that had no clouds in them. And if you can imagine a data set with hundreds of images, it takes a lot of time to do that. Then you'd have to transfer that image from whatever platform you're retrieving it from, say the USGS, put it into Envy, and start analyzing it with the tools they have, which you can alter. Now, if you have a very large satellite image, which, of course, most satellite images are massive swaths of land, sometimes gigabytes of data in a single image, doing one of these processes could take anywhere from a few minutes to several hours to, depending on the process, weeks or months of computer processing time. Google Earth Engine solves that because they use and harness Google's existing infrastructure in order to parallelize that process and speed things up exponentially. Now, one of the powers, again, of Earth Engine is not only the fact that it's accessible, but it aligns very well with existing interfaces for GIS and remote sensing software. So again, I showed you the JavaScript API, but there's also a Python API. And again, JavaScript is a software programming language. It's very common in web applications. Python is a software language as well that's starting to be used not only for web interfaces, but just allowing computers to talk to one another. It's a very good glue language. Now, the Python API, which you can't see here actually because it's installed on every computer, allows you to take the power of Earth Engine, the processing power, and put it beneath any one of your websites that you want. So you can basically align an analytical process with your existing websites. So if you have a very, very data-intensive process that you want to serve live to people, say running multiple stands across an entire landscape and showing everyone exactly why you chose to do the management principles you did on every stand, you can do that with Earth Engine very quickly and accessibly.
May I request, maybe you can show some examples straight up that would give us a little more view.
Sure.
Of what you can do.
Sure. I'll go ahead and show you spectral angle mapping. Now, a little bit of background on this ranch. 90 square kilometers, middle of Wyoming. They have about 1,200 yearlings, 600 cow-calf pairs, about 2,500 sheep, mixed rangelands and woodlands. One of their problems was there was a invasive species called leafy spurge that was basically taking over all of their wet areas and removing native forage for cows. They had no way of monitoring it except ocular estimates from the field. We decided to try to use satellite imagery to help track that. So spectral angle mapping is one way that you can do this in-member classification, or in-member being leafy spurge, and we're classifying every pixel according to whether or not it has spurge in it. The image you see here is a classified image. Areas that are green are areas that do not seem to have leafy spurge in them. Areas that are yellow seem more likely to have leafy spurge. Areas that are red are the most likely to have leafy spurge. So very quickly, after writing the script, the spectral angle mapping script, which we did within the automatic programming interface, we were able to show them across their entire landscape where spurge was located. So another classification that we did is called mixture tune matched filtering. It's very similar to spectral angle mapping, but it's actually computationally a bit more involved. Whereas the spectral angle map only showed you areas that were likely to have spurge or not, mixture tune match filtering shows you not only the areas that are likely to have spurge, but the probability that those pixels are actually false positively classified. So this goes to show that any sort of analytical process, no matter how simple it is, no matter how complex it is, if you understand it mathematically, can be programmed into this API, and then all of the results can be delivered on the fly.
If I may just add to what Evan is saying, we've got these multiple platforms. We're talking about forest management system, fire management system, so on and so forth. Many of those can actually get integrated in a very easy way on Google Earth Engine without spending too much money on specially licensed software. What the other real advantage is that this allows for access of information not just from anywhere, obviously, but also if you wanted to share it with somebody else, it is very comfortably shared. You don't have to say, okay, do you have this software, do you have this thing or not, and so on and so forth. So this is just a great way for doing kind of MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is going to be important for the RED Plus activities that we're talking about in the next 10, 15 years.
In fact, this technology is already being used here. Anurag is there. Our IT person who is related, not now. We are already using all this technology, right?
Yeah.
And while before this posting, I was in charge of developing the forest. One of the things which I was projecting before the planning commission was these images 10 years back and now.
Right.
Yeah.
Straight away.
Right.
And it's only going to get better,
Yeah.
is the thing. And the more remote sensing data comes in, the more we're going to have to harness computing power so that we can process what we need to process. So.
Right. And one of the great things of images is that we can very clearly demonstrate without you know.
There is nothing to speak there.
Exactly.
Yes. Just look at the map, right? Alark was saying that it's very, very easy to share one of these scripts as well. And there are a couple ways you can do that. If someone wanted to look at the analysis that you were doing, first of all, you could just send them the script itself, which is just a simple copy and paste. Or if you wanted to show them the whole map, all you'd have to do is press the get link and send them the link here. Anywhere in the world, if they're in a web browser, they can look at it. Fantastic. So
The power really is that Google Earth is carrying images now from 1970s onward. So sometimes getting a single image costs us a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And so Google Earth is providing us free of charge, really. So we can do change detection analysis over 30 years to really kind of solidly quantify and tell what we've done or something that is going wrong, both ways. That's a very powerful way.
Actually, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the change vector analysis. So another particular tool that the ranch hands were interested in was trying to figure out across their entire landscape, was their management actually increasing the quality of the soil, the quality of the vegetation, the amount of water available, or was it decreasing it? So if we take a look at this image, let me zoom in a little bit, and it's going to load. Their strategy is actually a little different than what other ranches were using. They wanted to do what's called a high-intensity, low-duration grazing scheme. And that means instead of having a lot of land area with a small amount of cows, the idea is to push a lot of cows into a very small area, but move them through that small area rapidly. Now, previously, this technique has been very, very hotly debated within the grazing community. And to date, there have really been no studies trying to very empirically determine whether or not it was a positive strategy or not. But one of the studies we're actively finishing right now is seeking to answer this question of whether or not that strategy is good, because of the availability of remote sensing data and the processing power. This script shows us, and let me just tell you the colors, areas of green are areas that have changed positively in terms of vegetation from 1999 to 2014. Areas that are black are areas that have not changed really much at all, kind of net neutral change. And areas that are red are areas that have changed negatively in terms of vegetation. The analytical technique that we used here is called change vector analysis, specifically used to do this sort of change detection. Below that, we used an analytical technique called a tasseled cap transformation. And what that does is basically it takes satellite data and transfers the spectral information per pixel, so light data, which is what you see whenever you look at a photograph, and it orients that data in terms of a brightness index, which gives you a measure of the level of exposed soil, a wetness index, which is how much moisture is available, and a greenness index, which is a measure of vegetation. So we can take that transformation and understand our satellite imagery in a lot more accessible way for ranch managers or for people who aren't learned in those particular scientific processes. Now, when we first did this particular script, we were incredibly excited because of what we see right here in the center of the screen. Now, this polygon here is just the shape of the ranch. What's inside of it is a continuous mosaic satellite image that has been cleaned from clouds. There's no sort of separation of anybody else's land inside of this area. But there's actually one person who owns a field in the middle of this ranch, and he's very separate from the ranch that we're working with. He manages his cows in a very old school way. He just lets them graze, a small number of them, across a pretty large pasture. This gave us a good baseline by which to understand that new grazing regime. The outside of this ranch, or the outside of this polygon, is the ranch we were working with. The inside was that other ranch. As you can tell from this black corner here, there seems to be a feature right there, even though this is a continuous satellite image. We were so excited because this black feature, which our analysis picked up, is actually his exact fence line on the middle of the ranch. And if you notice, on one side of that fence line, there are more black pixels and some red pixels. On the other side, on the outside, there are green pixels. And this basically hinted to us that the strategy that the ranch is using may actually be positively benefiting the management and the land there. So that's just one example of change analysis that was applied with free imagery, without the need for any proprietary software, and we can share it very, very simply and easily with anybody who's interested. If I wanted to look at soils instead of vegetation, all I'd have to do is go into my script, change one line, press the run button again. What happens? Google servers have taken my script. They start to pull down massive amounts of Landsat data. They start to clean it, looking at every pixel to determine whether or not there's a cloud. Once they've determined the relative cloud likelihood in that pixel, they look at its color value and mosaic it to pixels around it to see which pixels that are clean fit together most effectively. After all that is done, then they apply the tassel cap transformation that I talked about. Then they apply the change vector analysis script. And then they return the results to me. So all of the processing happens in the nearest Google data center. And Google has data centers at this point all around the world. So I'm going to let this load for just a moment. And to give you an idea about this too, Envy previously, doing this sort of analysis would have taken maybe hours to process. Not mentioning the time it took to clean and mosaic the remote sensing data, which is all done here automatically. And it looks like actually it's already done loading. We can look at the image as far as what its metadata is here, but then we have the new image loading in our screen, just like the old one. And as you can see again, in terms of soils, that same difference occurred in the middle of the ranch as it did with vegetation. So we were, again, ecstatic when we saw this. Now, to give you an example, go ahead. 5 minutes? Okay, to give you an example of some analysis that I've done with data that Google did not have, I'll show you actually a place closer to home for y'all. What we wanted to do here was for these regions, using census data, find which of these regions is most vulnerable to disaster according to their socioeconomic status. So we took in a ton of census data, which has 50 to 60 parameters, all across the socioeconomic sort of state of mind. We used a principal components analysis, which reorients all of that data in a way that's more understandable and reorders that data to show us what's more useful in terms of what's there. After we did that, we applied a little bit of other analysis to understand of those reoriented socioeconomic variables, which ones showed us the most vulnerable, and then we colored them according to what was most vulnerable, what was least vulnerable.
So this, by the way, this area is the same place where we had massive landslides and about more than 8,000, or some are saying 15,000 people died. And one of the argument is, how can we recognize, or how can we develop methods to identify vulnerable populations? So can we use Google Earth engine-based data to develop such vulnerability maps such that we can prioritize our actions for reducing the vulnerability of local communities?
Yeah. And the color wheel here is basically purple are the least vulnerable, blue is the most vulnerable. So using that data, which we acquired from an external source, we loaded it into Google Earth Engine. Now we're able to use it, to share it, to analyze it on the fly and then display it on the go as well. So, and also too, just quickly for folks who are interested in GIS, this is an example of vector-based data inside of Earth Engine, whereas all the scripts I've shown you so far are examples of raster-based analyses. Both are possible within Google Earth Engine. So just a couple examples of what can be done with websites with Google Earth Engine. This is an example that folks have been using for a few years now. It's called Trendy Lights. They take a nighttime light data set from satellites from around the world, put them onto the single base map, and there are 3 polygons here. One's Poland, one's an oil field, and this one's Moldova. And we can not only see the base data set, but once we click on the polygon, we can see how bright these places were over a period of time, going back to before the 1990s and to today. So again, imagine a website where you have all of your stands or all of your districts loaded up. Someone can click on a district and see what management you're planning. Not only what management you're planning, but also why you plan that particular management because of the sustainability metrics that we can identify with tree list or with stand level data. So one last example is time lapse. Now this is basically Google Earth Engine's crowning jewel. Being able to go back in time and see what's happened in a land area. And this is Bhopal. And all I had to do was click on this time-lapse tool, go back, and it shifts through all of the available images that have been cleaned and processed so that we can see what's happening from year to year.
So, first of all, once again, my name is Alert Saxena. I'm now faculty member at, my name is Alert Saxena. I'm a faculty member at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. I'm originally from Bhopal, so I'm really happy to come back here. I'm a graduate of Indian Institute of Forest Management, and I started really my career with the Forest Department in Balaghat. So it's really kind of a truly homecoming for me. I'm really excited to be here. And my first boss was Anand Kumar, so that's our connection. I will not talk too much of details in terms of technicality, but I would want to sum up what we've discussed today, just to kind of see where we are. Whatever we are basically talking today, from a worldview point of view, is about sustainable development goals. First there were Millennium Development Goals, now we're talking about sustainable development goals. But essentially it's about sustainability of our forest resources and how they can provide different values to local communities. So this is just kind of summarizing some of the ideas in terms of SDGs. If you see here, while number 15 is our sustainable development goal for forestry, really forest is actually supporting many more values across the board. We were talking about models. Why do we need models? Why do we need these computing models? And the argument is almost all models are wrong. The argument is some models are more useful than the others. So we were talking about this decision support system that Chad was talking about. The idea is to help policymakers, decision makers, use certain methods in a way that you can think about the future scenarios and how you can change or kind of optimize your methods. So a great argument here is in a real world we cannot do too many experimentations to find results, right? This will be sometimes, if you do this, for example, let me just sit down, that would be better. So if you have a problem and you do experiments and find results, often the experiments might not be feasible, overly expensive, or sometimes unethical. Think about a forest community completely removed from its subsistence on forest. While we understand what can happen, but that experiment is not the best thing that we want to do. So instead, if we have a computer-based or a certain kind of model that can help us run certain scenarios and come up with some understanding, that makes a hell lot of a difference. So that's why computing really helps. And I know that I'm not saying something new. You guys have heard about this before, but just want to re-establish the importance of modeling techniques. We saw the land management system that is very good in terms of describing the ecological growth and how these values can be seen, right, through these different projection systems. The other thing that I also wanted to talk about, which you discussed, is that especially for MP Forest Department, livelihoods of local communities becomes really important. So can we use some of our models to also look at how human dimensions or human dynamics can also be incorporated in these modeling systems? And I would say in today's modeling world, we can do that. A large part of what I've done is also integrate human and ecological dynamics together and project it over a period of time.
But human dynamics cannot be projected.
You are very,
Human dynamics is absolutely unpredictable.
I completely agree with you, but there are certain behaviors that we can think about.
We can only think about
Right.
it. We
So,
cannot project.
which is why I started with the argument all models are wrong, but some models are more useful than the other. Right. So this is just a kind of an expression of how many things are happening in a complex world that we have to deal with. So we might just think about a certain livelihood of a local household, but all of these variables are essentially affecting the income opportunities of a household or a village. There are political issues, there are social issues, there are environmental issues. At the same time, there are market issues. So there's such an incredible amount of complexity that all of them put together is often very hard for even policymakers to think through. So can we develop something that can allow some of these things to be simultaneously seen? And that's what we're talking about. So this is just, I'm not going to go into this, but just to show some of the background modeling that's gone into some of the dynamics. Here is this, especially a model about non-timber forest produce that we had developed especially on Mahua and Achar. There are many other dynamics especially for the livelihood model that we've created, and again, there's migration, there's human growth rate, there are government-sponsored labor systems, so on and so forth. So these are all just to show that the models become complex. But the idea then is that what has been described in the landscape management system as a growth and need model, can be incorporated with some of these livelihood dimensions where we can understand human behavior as well. So some of the studies that I did, actually my PhD was close to Ratapani area. This is why we created these models. And this is, if you know Obedullah Ganj, and then especially,
Almost everybody knows here.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that. So anyways, we can do this through the landscape management system. We created scenarios, and that's what we are looking for. Again, when we talk about models here, models are not decision making system, models are decision support system, which means that policymakers can say, let's try to do X, Y, or Z silvicultural operation, see what happens. And once we have compared multiple scenarios, we can say which one is a better option than the other. So, of course, what we are showing here is a business as usual, an active management, and a reserve forest or a protected area based on carbon sequestration. So you can certainly project total carbon, you can project total volumes over a period of multiple years. But the other thing that we were talking about is the management of multiple values. And when we talk about biodiversity, can we manage for biodiversity? Can we manage for ecosystem services? For example, what you were talking about, water. So based on habitat structures, we can also define such values. So this is just showing business as usual and active management versus a reserve forest. You have different kinds of habitat structures that are coming up. But then we can also look at what happens if you put an area in reserve forest and the community is not allowed to come in, how quickly their income can drop down. So these are two scenarios of business as usual where the income can fall over a long period of time. And I can go into details and discuss about some of this, but the idea is for you to appreciate that we can project some of these values over a long period of time and take better decisions. This is something that we do. This is coming out of my PhD thesis, where we saw the overall values, incomes going down because of forest degradation around this village panchayat area. So the blue line essentially is the business as usual scenario, and associated to it is the green line, which is the population of village members in the village, so total households in the area. So while there is income going down, we expect a population to rise in the area. But as soon as the income, which is the red now, and if we protect the forest and do not allow people to access livelihoods, the income falls, and you can also see immediately that the people also start migrating out of the region. So sometimes we intuitively know that this is going to happen. But we can now have data-driven approaches to quantify some of our decision making. So far so good. So what we are talking about here in terms, and I would be interested in hearing your thoughts also, is to try to create an integrated management system or a decision support system, as we talk about, which can really help us in not only making decisions and analyze policies, but it can also develop capacity of our own policymakers in terms of what happens one way or the other. So this tool that we're talking about, for example, landscape management system, can help us understand and appreciate different silvicultural management policies over a long period of time. And that allows us for in many ways, capacity building of what can happen. So I will leave this, but basically one of the things that really is coming from the recent climate negotiations is this monitoring, reporting, and verification. And so through some of these, we all know about REDD+, right? While India is not a very big gainer of REDD+, but I think we still can benefit from REDD+ kind of activities. And so how do we create a projection of volume over 50 to 100 years? So that value can be used as a baseline. How can we then tell an international community that based on this baseline, we are still managing it very clearly, right? So we project and we kind of manage our forest based on our projection and show how much we are sequestering for ecosystem services, how much we are sequestering carbon. So all of those can be shown with business as usual projections. We can report on this, and we can allow international agencies to come back and actually verify as we have projected in a very systematic and sustainable way. So these are kind of some of the broad views that we've been working on, and I personally think, and I've talked to Chad, and we think that MP Forest Department really is kind of a leader in terms of looking at IT related projects, in terms of looking at new tools and techniques, and that this could be a great way for some of the new things to be brought in to the decision making system. So I'm going to summarize this right here. Thank you very, very much for organizing this meeting. We're really truly honored to be here, and I look forward to more discussions.
In fact, one of the models that you are suggesting is forests getting degraded and income of people going down. Can we link with why forests are getting degraded? Because it is a cycle.
Absolutely.
Forests are getting degraded because of greed of people.
Absolutely.
So if we start linking all those at a place, I don't know whether it is possible or not, but if we start linking it, showing like that,
yeah,
possibly decision makers may think otherwise.
I'm really glad you brought that out. So the model exactly does this. So the reason the income is going down is because of people's behavior. So it is the unsustainable extraction of forest resources that is reducing the quality of forest, and hence they by themselves are reducing the quality of forest over a period of time. So this is actually well within the models, and yeah.
The models we are comparing.
Jay.
Take the case of United States of America. I think we are listening for 45 minutes.
Right.
Just look at the statistics of two societies, India versus United States of America. Their annual GDP is around $17 trillion.
Right.
India is 2.0.
Right.
Their population is 30 crores.
Right.
Our is 125 crores.
Right.
In Madhya Pradesh, we have 53,000 villages.
Right.
Out of that, 2,600 villages are inside forest, are on the fringe of it.
Right.
Means almost now more than 2 crores of population.
Right.
Is very poor.
Right.
Even is struggling for subsistence.
Absolutely.
Earning not more than 50 rupees per day.
Right.
You can think of stress being developed in the forest for the subsistence,
Yeah.
which I think is not coming from other alternate sources because of the economic
Right.
strength
Right.
of this state and of the country as well.
Right.
So trying to develop a model
Yeah.
that you could no matter this country.
Right.
Then the comparisons of economies and societies should be almost somewhere similar.
Right.
The two societies of either Madhya Pradesh or India and America are radically different.
Right.
A sustainable model you can think of in a society with the structure I discussed.
Right.
But it cannot be thought of in a society of Madhya Pradesh or
Right.
it can be compared with some other developing economies like China, Japan,
Yeah.
even in Asia, where I think population is higher. The forest area is also quite comparable to India.
Yeah.
In China, they are getting lakh square kilometer. We in the entire country have 6,80,000 square.
Right.
But
So-
they have shifted because of their growing economy, more of money coming from the industry and services sector. The dependence on forest, they have reduced.
Right.
I think the amount of money coming into the entire GDP of the country is less than 1%.
Absolutely.
India it is 1.4%.
Right.
Still here the management systems which are demanding even at state and center is we are thinking of increasing productivity.
Right.
Which is I think is a very radical management problem.
So I think you've summarized it.
I
Yeah.
think your comparison,
Right.
no doubt, it was all very good. It will help us.
Thank you.
Your Google Earth data and whatever you are saying.
Right.
But I think if we want to have a road model somewhere which we can think of succeeding in Madhya Pradesh,
Right.
or even in India as a whole,
Right.
then I think we should go to the history of society
Absolutely.
which are facing similar problems, somewhere similar problems, and have come out of that.
So I'm glad you summarized this. You've summarized it very well. I think we've actually debated number of times, even within our academic systems. Can you compare one model to the other? That's one question. And can you compare human behavior from one society to the other? Both of those are very important questions. One is to understand model structure. When we develop a model structure in terms of growth and yield, the growth and yield models relatively behave similarly. They're parameters of how fast or how slow something can grow. What's the species competition slightly can be different, but overall behaviors can be relatively mapped. We might be 80% right or maybe 70% right, but we can map it, which is the beauty of computer-based modeling, that it is replicable. The other question, which is the human dimensions, I think that's an absolutely right question, because our society and our behavior is relatively different than, let's say, an American society, which might be very differently oriented. But the operations done by a society, for example, when we say humans' engagement in forest can be, quote, radically different from, let's say, America. Think about it. How many ways is it different? It might be choosing a different kind of species. It might be extracting a different style of things. It might give a preferential treatment to one species than the other. So if you think about it, some of these are very easily incorporated. It's only a matter of what silviculture operation is happening in one stand versus the other. In America, it could be a very different silviculture operation, but it is still a silviculture operation.
What is a person in a particular economic class behaves almost in similar way.
Right.
Everywhere.
Right.
A poor person behaves similarly as in India, in China, Japan, even in America.
Right.
A person belonging to an upper class behaves almost in a similar way because their necessities are almost similar.
Right. And their consumption, sometimes Indian people, rich Indian people are more extractive.
Necessity is different.
Right. And one of the things that I'm basically trying to show from this model is that some of these structures are easily comparable. Others we can tweak them. So once the model structure is there, you have only 7 or 8 different ways in which humans interact with forest. You protect a species or you burn. You extract fuel wood or you don't. You collect seeds of a particular species or you don't, right? Or you do lopping a lot or you don't. So all of those, once you have created a growth and yield model, most of those structures can be just tweaked. In America, nobody collects the fruits. But in India, everybody collects. So regeneration is going to be, let's say, equal to 0. But then it is not completely different in terms of the dynamics. And the second thing is, once we have incorporated some of these computing techniques, then we can improvise significantly over a longer period of time. So one is that we have thought about this, we have incorporated, now we are improving it. So maybe initially we think about the models only as 60% or 70% accurate. But let's say in the next 10 years with data available from Forest Department, another 15 years, those models can become super accurate. And that means that you have some of the world's foremost methods now of telling how well we can project our forest stands, which is what's happening. Canada, Finland, US and Germany, these are very few countries that use model-based projection.
but they have collected systematic data and have improved their techniques over 10 years or so. So once we incorporate some of these methods, we can do a very specialized model for ourselves. That's going to be, and I think the reason we are here and we are very interested is because we think that, Indian forest systems, and especially MP forest system, is nicely placed to do some of these things for the future and essentially become a leader in providing some of these methods. Chad would highlight this, but we were just in Turkey, and the Turkish government, which is flush with money right now, their budgets are above $2 billion for a very small forest area. They are really interested in using these methods to prove forward. And what we think is that based on entrepreneurs here who are willing and can develop software techniques very quickly, based on these models, we can actually do a long-term partnership with outside countries as well in terms of leadership and providing these newer methods. So just as a point, by 2020, each country has to define its own methods of monitoring, reporting and verification, which means that right now from here to the next 3 or 4 years, every country is going to figure out what is their method of reporting. And these methods, if we do it right, we could be way ahead in leading the game and showing the leadership in terms of Indian forestry's capacity to do kind of both good sustainable management of forestry, as well as look at the broader ideas of biodiversity, ecosystem services and livelihoods.
On behalf of MP Forest Department, we thank Professor Chad and his team for coming over here and sharing his different thoughts and also the technology, new things. And we are also thankful to all the senior officials of the Forest Department and the Forest Plus people who are working I think coordinating with the Yale Institute. Thank you very much, and you are all invited over a cup of tea just outside the. Thank you.
Discussions may continue over